Okay, well, it's 1:07, so we can get started here. I know some people are continuing to join us, but I'd like to get started. So good evening. Welcome to the November 19th meeting of the Long Range Planning Committee. My name is James Schroll, and I'm the chair of LRPC. For the safety of our LRPC members and county staff, along with those who are joining us, we are holding a virtual meeting today. All participants are joining us remotely. We are legally authorized to hold this virtual meeting based on the governor's executive orders, legislation adopted by the Virginia General Assembly, and the county board's continuity of operations ordinance adopted in March 2020. As this is a virtual meeting, I'd like to orient everyone to our virtual environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Tonight's meeting is available to join from the calendar invites Microsoft Teams link, the LRPC webpage, each of the two project pages, the county events calendar, and at the top of the agenda for tonight's meeting. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If anyone uses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, we'd suggest reconnecting with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon to speak. Turn off the sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For everyone joining us via Teams, please turn off your video feed, which I've already addressed. I will mention when to turn it on in a moment. When called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located towards the bottom of your screen on the meeting command bar. The moderator, myself, does not have the ability to unmute you. The meeting chat is active to serve three purposes. 1, for participants who need technical assistance. 2, for other attendees to pose brief, clarifying questions to the larger audience. While those will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may, however, decide to address these comments as appropriate. And 3, for attendees who wish to register to make public comments. If you're interested in making a public comment, please type into the meeting chat your name and your desire to make a comment. The meeting chat should not be used for discussion or any inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat will not serve that opportunity. All public comments must be made verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. While we hope to be done by 9 p.m. tonight, if we're sensing that we're close to reaching the conclusion of our discussion, hope we have some flexibility to go over a little bit and also to allow for public comment. In addition to our fellow planning commissioners, we are joined by representatives from each of the 5 neighboring civic associations. We also have representatives from several of the county commissions. If LRPC members wish to be recognized, please turn on your video feed or raise your virtual hand and leave your microphone muted. When I call on you, then you may unmute yourself to make your remarks. After you've concluded your remarks, please turn off your video feed and then also lower your virtual hand. Do we have any LRPC members joining us by phone today? Okay, don't hear any. For members of the public, at the end of the meeting, I will call on those who have signed up to speak. You will be muted, so once I call on you, please unmute yourself. After you've concluded your remarks, you may, please mute yourself again. And lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay, so after that kind of lengthy discussion, I want to do some brief introductions. We have a lot of members of staff with us this evening, so we will only introduce some of those, although there will be other individuals on the call to help us when we get to our discussion and question and answer. And then I want to make sure that members of the LRPC have an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. So let's start with staff with Tim Murphy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Murphy with Arlington's Planning Division, the Comprehensive Planning Section, and I'm the LRPC Staff Liaison.
Thank you, Tim. Brett Wallace. Brett, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Brett Wallace. I'm also with the Planning Division and the Urban Design Section, and I'll be the project manager for this study.
Thank you, Brett. Matt Ladd.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Ladd with the county's Planning Division and Comprehensive Planning.
Great, thanks. So now go to the LRPC members. So I see we have with us Charles Craig.
Good evening, Charles Craig with Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board.
Hey, Charles. David Orr.
Hi, good evening. This is David Orr speaking with the 10th and Irving property developer.
Thank you, David. David Poplitz.
Good evening, David Poplitz, Fire Chief, Arlington County Fire Department.
Thank you. Davis Rajic. Apologies if I mispronounced that.
It's Radek, just ignore the J. Thank you. I'm with the Transportation Commission.
Thank you, Davis. Elizabeth Morton.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Morton. I'm on the Planning Commission. I have a declaration of interest. I apologize, I need to read, but pursuant to section 2.2-3115.h, for the record, I need to state that with regard to the subject of this meeting, the Clarendon Sector Plan Update, I own property on Kirkwood Road, which is part of the Brompton's development, which is on the edge of this sector plan study update site. Along with all property owners immediately proximate to the project site, my property interests could be negatively or positively affected by the project. I have been advised that my property ownership constitutes a personal interest under the State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act, but that I may nonetheless participate in the consideration of the project because my personal interest may be affected by the project in the same way as all property owners immediately proximate to it. Because of this, I'm permitted to participate in the consideration of the project and can do so fairly, objectively, and in the public interests. Apologies for that, but needed to put that out there in case I make a comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Morton. Jack Spilsbury.
Sorry, looking for those icons again. Jack Spilsbury.
Jack, you've muted yourself again.
I don't know how I did that. Jack Spilsbury, along with David Phillips, I co-chair the Ashton Heights Civic Association Development Committee. Thank you very much. Look forward to participating.
Thank you, Jack. Well, glad you're joining us. Jane Siegel.
Can't seem to make my camera work, but that's okay. My name is Jane Siegel. I'm a member of the Planning Commission. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Jim Lintelmy.
Good evening, it's Jim Lintelmy. I'm also a member of the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner. John Armstrong.
Hey, I'm John Armstrong on the Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Make sure I'm looking at this right. Matt Anderson.
Hello, everyone. I'm with Jefferson Apartment Group. We are partnering with Ackridge on the Wells Fargo and Verizon site.
Thanks. Leo Sarli.
Good evening. I'm Leo. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Nia Bagley.
Hey, everybody. Nia Bagley, Planning Commission.
Thank you. Rashad Bader.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rashad Bader. I'm the chairman of the St. Charles Redevelopment Committee.
Welcome. Steve Finn.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Finn. I'm with the Park and Recreation Commission.
Welcome. And Steve Sockwell.
Yeah, Steve Sockwell. I'm with the Urban Forestry Commission. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. We have a long list of folks this evening, including a number of members of staff. Did I fail to acknowledge one of our commissioners or other participants on the LRPC? Collier, go ahead, sir.
Hello, this is Collier Cook with the Boston, Virginia Square Civic Association. Thank you.
And Benjamin Nichols.
Yeah, this is Benjamin Nichols. I'm with the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association.
Welcome to you both. All right. So appreciate that. And Benjamin, if you can lower your virtual hand, please, that would be great. So tonight we have kind of two main goals. One is to provide some feedback on the fire station 4 siting, kind of, and get a sense from staff their preliminary thinking, and then provide some feedback to staff regarding some creative ideas for new parks and public open spaces. So we're going to start with a presentation from staff for about the next 30 to 40 minutes. People are going to hold their questions, and then we're going to have about 40 minutes or so, maybe around 50 minutes for discussion among LRPC. We do have some discussion questions, and we can also have some discussion at that point. At the end of that, we will have some wrap up and discuss next steps. And we will certainly have some time for public comment. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Brett Wallace to go through staff's presentation. And I would encourage everybody to please turn off your cameras if you're not speaking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schroll. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, welcome and good evening. It's good to see everybody virtually for our first LRPC meeting for the Clarendon Sector Plan Update. Again, my name is Brett Wallace, and I work in the Planning Division in the Urban Design section, and I'll be the project manager for this effort. But I'm also joined by other staff in CPHD, DES, the Fire Department, and DPR. And so we're really excited to begin this process, and we're looking forward to working with everyone here. So with that, why don't we begin? Before we get started, I know Mr. Schroll gave an overview of the agenda. As part of the staff presentation, we intend to go over the overview of the study, the process and timeline, some highlights from the October 29th engagement session. And then we're going to go over some of the online survey results that we received. And then we'll have some staff responses to some of the survey results. And then we'll jump into LRBC discussion and wrap up with next steps and public comment. So we want to begin by giving a brief overview of the study as a refresh and an intro for those that may have seen the online materials, but for those that didn't, that were posted in September and October. So the objective of the study will be to consider focused updates to detailed policy guidance in the 2006 sector plan. We'll be considering refinements to detailed recommendations for sites within the study area. The update will not be revisiting the vision statement, overarching goals, or framework elements. However, the process will provide an opportunity to review planning issues holistically prior to beginning the SPRC, PFRC, or any park master planning processes. Some of the plan elements to be evaluated in the study include land uses for private redevelopment, building height and form, transportation, a new fire station to replace Fire Station 4, and public open spaces. In terms of the engagement process, the primary review group will be the LRPC with participation from the 5 neighboring civic associations that Mr. Schroll mentioned earlier, along with relevant commissions and the development team representatives. Community members are also invited to provide input throughout the online engagement tools, which many of you have done already, so thank you. And then, of course, virtual meetings, which we're in now, will be hosted through Microsoft Teams, and links to view all the meetings will provide on the project websites. So let's first take a look at the study area. So the study area shown outlined here on this slide with the white dashed line consists of the blocks immediately south of the Clarendon Circle, bounded by Washington Boulevard, North Hudson Street, and 10th Street North. The existing uses within the study area include Block 1, which is the St. Charles Catholic Church site, Block 2, which includes the Northside Social, T&J Auto Body, Dominion Substation, C&G Imports, and the Triangle Park and the DPR Maintenance Facility. Both are county owned. And then moving east to Site 3, the Silver Diner assemblage, includes currently a few small office and retail buildings in the Lot Beer Garden. And looking at Site 4, on the corner of North Irving and 10th Street, this includes the Joyce Motors site. And then Site 5 includes the Wells Fargo Bank and the Verizon Switching Station building. And then Site 6 is the county-owned parcel, which includes Fire Station 4, the Fire Prevention Office, and the Clarendon House. In terms of site plan applications, we've accepted a 4.1 site plan application for the Joyce Motors site, and the Wells Fargo team has submitted a concept plan application. We anticipate an application soon from the Silver Diner team, and we expect the church will file sometime next year. So looking at the schedule, we're just getting started. We kicked off the process in September by posting several briefing materials online. We hope everybody had a chance to review those items, and if not, we encourage you to do so. The first online engagement session and materials focusing on Fire Station 4 and open space were posted in late October and will be discussed tonight. I'll provide a brief overview in a minute, but I wanted to say that this isn't the last time that we'll discuss these topics. We expect that these conversations will continue throughout the process, providing plenty of opportunity for public input. So looking ahead, you'll see other agenda topics listed under each online engagement session. So for example, in December, we'll dive deeper into the private development proposals. We'll look at some 3D modeling scenarios and some of the streets and transportation. We feel that this engagement approach will continue into the third quarter of next year with county board actions. So now I'll pull out some of the highlights from the October engagement session before we dive into the survey results. So in the October engagement, we discussed the fire station and the public space opportunities. And for fire, we provided fire response data, current station conditions, prior planning work. We went over sector plan guidance, siting and program considerations, and siting approaches. And for parks and open space, we looked at guidance from the public spaces master plan, including level of service maps. We looked at the sector plan guidance from 2006. We also looked at opportunities and constraints for Fairfax Drive. We also provided some scale diagrams and some precedent images, along with some discussion questions. For fire, we provided an overview of the sector plan guidance for the county's 10th Street site and the fire station, which included the concept of a new park on both the county and Verizon sites. The implementation of the park would require the demolition and relocation of the county facilities and Verizon building, but the plan did not specify exactly where they would go. The plan also leaves open the possibility of redeveloping the county site, co-locating public facilities with housing. After outlining some of the program and siting considerations for the fire station, we presented 4 different approaches along with some pros and cons for each to consider. The first being to rebuild on the current site, which would preclude the sector plan vision for the 10th Street Park. Number 2 was to look at the other county-owned sites that we also determined that did not meet the size requirements. And then number 3 was partnering with private developer within the study area, and from what we've heard, the development teams have declined the county's request. And number 4, land acquisition, where there are site limitations and cost concerns, and we'll go over these in more detail later in the presentation in the LRPC discussion. But based on our analysis, staff's preliminary conclusion is that rebuilding Fire Station 4 in the current site best meets the fire department's program requirements. We then provided policy guidance for parks and open space, looking at recently adopted public space master plan as well as the sector plan. The PSMP includes an action for securing spaces envisioned in sector plans or other plans adopted by the county board, including the Clarendon sector. The 10th Street Park, as envisioned in the sector plan, would be developed in phases over a long period of time. You can see in the phase 1 diagram how this might be achieved with the Verizon building remaining. This would also require relocating the fire station elsewhere in Clarendon. The full park shown in phase 2 diagram would require full or partial demolition of the Verizon building. This would result in a large rectangular park of approximately 50,000 square feet. The West End Plaza would be designed with a mix of hardscape and landscaped areas to support gatherings and market-type events. And a flexible Fairfax Drive would serve as an extension of the West End Plaza, also supporting market uses. It's envisioned to be a pedestrian-oriented, curb-free environment. Understanding that it may be difficult to achieve some of the sector plan goals, we're starting to think now about how new opportunities for public space. We presented conceptual diagrams for potential ideas for both public and private sites. A somewhat new idea that we presented is the concept of repurposing all or most of Fairfax Drive as a linear park space. This idea takes the sector plan guidance for Fairfax Drive a little bit farther, reimagining this space as a green spine that connects Virginia Square to Central Clarendon. To help understand this more, we discussed opportunities and constraints in the diagram below. We also provided some scale comparisons and nearby linear park spaces as precedent images. And we included survey questions for online feedback, which we'll go over in a minute. So now we'll cover some of the feedback we heard from the October engagement. We had a total of 121 responses, which is a good start, knowing there's a lot of interest. And looking first at the demographic data, we asked what your connection is to the study. And as you can see here, the majority of folks live nearby, which is good, or visit for retail or Recreation. And of the respondents, the greatest number live in the 3 neighboring zip codes of 22201, 22207, and 22203. And then this slide really sums up the survey questions in total that we asked for both the fire station and parks. So I'll now spend some time going through each one, starting with the fire station. So going back to the approaches that we had presented in October, we asked if there was agreement on staff's preliminary conclusion of rebuilding Fire Station 4 on the current site. Of the 84 that answered this question, 73% either agree or somewhat agree with 24% either neutral or unsure. And we'll revisit this again during the LRPC discussion later this evening. And we also asked the question, if the county rebuilds the Fire Station 4 on site, would you support the county partnering with the developer to provide additional uses above the station? And here again, you can see that 76% of the 87 responses received either support or partially support partnering with the developer. And we'll also cover this in our discussion later this evening, so we'll come back to these. We had a few open-ended questions in the survey, so we pulled out some of the common themes in the responses. And here we asked if there are other approaches that should be considered in siting Fire Station 4. And we saw that there was some agreement with the approaches and considerations in the staff presentation. Some were requesting more information on alternative sites for land acquisition. And then we saw there was a need to account for the future population growth and traffic impacts on response times. And then some were questioning the size and the number of public safety vehicles and if that could be reevaluated. And then the design of the new station should be conscious of cost. And here are some additional comments on rebuilding the Fire Station 4 on the current site and possible co-location of other uses. One, we saw some support for rebuilding the station on site, strong support for co-locating uses, including housing or affordable housing, public or community uses, some support for maximizing the allowable height and density on the county site, some support for increasing planned density and building height to incentivize a private partnership similar to what we did with Fire Station 10 in West Roslyn, and some concern about noise impacts from a fire station and having housing above, and providing some green space on the site if redeveloped, and co-location should not impact the fire department operations. We also wanted to capture some additional comments here, and these are just a few of the many received. And for reference, we've included a full set of comments on the LRPC and project websites of all the survey responses. We plan to discuss a few of these in more detail soon. For example, like what other county sites haven't or can't work, land acquisition, clarity on some of the modern fire station standards, and concern about noise. So we'll come back to these later in our discussion. So now we'll look at the survey results for the park and open space opportunities. For the public space survey, we began by asking people to rank the opportunities presented by staff. A good number of people ranked repurposing Fairfax Drive as most important. Responses for the next 3 were mixed, showing rankings for smaller at-grade or accessible rooftop spaces within private development. We then asked if you would support the idea of repurposing Fairfax Drive into a linear park. Out of the 117 responses, 56% partially support the idea, so we'll also want to discuss this further with the group. And as a follow-up to the previous question, we asked what concerns people have about the concept of Fairfax Drive. And as you can see, a good number of people are concerned about closing Fairfax Drive to vehicular traffic. And again, we'll come back to these and discuss more to understand how people use this street. We also heard why some people like the concept. For example, providing better connectivity between Clarendon and Virginia Square, adding more green space and tree canopy, providing a central gathering space for Clarendon, reclaiming private vehicle space for public space, less traffic, and more walkable pedestrian cyclist environment. And then we also heard some challenges for implementing a linear park on Fairfax Drive, which we agree with, which is maintaining the bicycle connection, providing some public parking nearby, and then access to the local businesses. And last, we asked if there were other ideas that maybe staff didn't address in our presentation. So again, we've captured a few of those ideas here that we'll address in the next section, such as repurposing North Irving Street right-of-way and continuing to look at the private sites for opportunities. So now we'll provide some preliminary staff responses to some of the feedback that we've heard, and then we'll jump right into discussion. So if we recall back to the fire station responses, one individual was seeking more clarity on the modern fire station designs. And so we've included a few bullets here just addressing those comments, including the quick flow from the dormitory and office areas to apparatus floor for quick turnout times, the drive-through vehicle bays to improve safety by reducing backing into the station movements, and isolating the dirty and contaminated areas from clean areas to prevent the spread of carcinogens, energy efficient building systems and designs, and new program design elements such as privacy, fitness, wellness, and community space. We understand some of the potential noise concerns people might have with housing or any other uses above a fire station. The siren noise, we point out, is also present for those other uses surrounding the station, and this is the case in most dense urban areas. And then other stations are developed with housing above, such as Fire Station 110 in Roslyn, and Station 209 in Potomac Yards. And from what we understand, noise has not been a major issue. And according to our records, the fire department has only received 2 noise complaints in the past 2 years. Excuse me. So in response to some of the comments that we heard in the results about land acquisition and why other sites in the RB corridor were considered, we included a few slides here with maps showing the travel times between stations to better understand why the current location works best for the fire department. The first map shows the current station locations, with green as the 2-minute travel time and yellow as the 4-minute travel times. The current location provides uniform 2-minute travel times, again shown in green in the corridor. And then station movements here should not increase model travel times more than 60 seconds or 1 minute, which is also shown in the light purple polygon. And the station needs to be located, as we mentioned before, on an arterial street. The next 2 slides show examples of the impact if Fire Station 4 was moved to the east or to the west. This slide being the east. So this example would show just an example location of shifting the fire station to the east. This east location would open up a gap that's greater than 2-minute travel times, which is shown in the yellow between the Ballston area and Clarendon area here. And again, station movement should not increase model travel times more than 1 minute. And the reflex time from incident access point to upper floor would increase. And what this is referring to is the time that it takes to get to an incident on an upper floor of a multi-story building from the front door. So it just adds to the time. And we can certainly come back to these slides later for clarity or questions. The final example here shows impact to the travel time if the station was moved to the west. And so the west location would again open up another gap greater than the 2-minute travel time shown in the yellow. Again, the station movement should not increase travel times more than 1 minute, which is shown in the light purple polygon. And again, the reflex time would increase for those upper floor incidents. And on the topic of land acquisition, while there may be other sites in the area that could support a fire station, we realize that the cost to acquire land is high and there's currently no funding available, and there's uncertainty for the future funding due to COVID-19. And so for these reasons, as we've stated before in our preliminary conclusion, we've decided to focus our efforts on the 10th Street site. Going back to the comment about why approach number 2 wouldn't work. Approach number 2, if you recall, was looking at the other nearby county-owned sites close to Fire Station 4. So we looked at the sites shown here and determined that they did not meet the size requirements. The program for Fire Station 4 requires an 18,000 square foot ground floor footprint and a 50-foot deep apron in the front. And as you can see on this slide, the other sites are smaller and in odd, less efficient shapes than the current site. We also wanted to provide more detail on the siding and program requirements. The table on the left of the slide lists all of the interior spaces required for the ground floor of the fire station. We've also provided some of the other requirements mentioned before, as well as the updated health and safety best practices for fire stations, such as the need for contamination zones, maneuverability, and allocation of uses. We also want to note that Fire Station 4 is the central Arlington station and has more staff and units operating from it, so its footprint is a little bit larger than other recent fire stations like Fire Station 10 and Fire Station 8. Looking a little bit closer at the current 10th Street site, we provided a conceptual layout here showing how a new station might fit on site. And so this concept shows a development footprint of 18,000 square feet at the ground level for a standalone fire station. And should we, the county, partner with a developer to provide additional uses or mixed use above the fire station, we just wanted to point out that the remainder of the site in this example may require additional ground floor lobby space, loading service areas, and structured parking. And we also want to note that in this scenario, we would be considering a 3-story station, a stacked program with other uses on the 2nd and 3rd floors. And those are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. So moving on to the open space comments that we heard, a lot of ideas about repurposing North Irving Street, potentially looking at more opportunities on the private sites. And so this diagram that we provided before shows the potential expansion of the existing plaza space at the north end of North Irving Street. So we'll continue to explore this and all the options in future engagements and LRPC meetings. We also heard from the survey challenges and concerns for Fairfax Drive. And so we identified a lot of the constraints in this diagram, but we as staff need to further analyze this as we continue our discussions to see how any future design could support cyclists, because we understand this is an important link between Virginia Square and Clarendon. We also understand concerns about parking and access to businesses that we plan to review further in our next engagement session. We'll look at the design of streets. So to close, we just wanted to bring people down to the street with these images of Fairfax Drive showing the existing condition, the scale, and the potential for the street. So with that, that concludes staff presentations. So thank you. Move into discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace, for that presentation. If you'd like to bring up the discussion questions, we can start with those. And we have been joined by some additional colleagues so on the LRPC. So welcome to Commissioner McSweeney, Commissioner Steinberger, and I don't think I introduced Mr. Schultz before. So thank you all for joining us this evening. So now I'd like to open up the floor for two things. So if anybody, let's start with maybe if people have just clarifying questions, something that wasn't clear from Mr. Wallace's presentation, and then we can go through these 5 questions, and then we can try to leave some time at the end if there's additional feedback you want to provide. Does anybody have just a kind of clarifying question before we get into your reactions to these 5 questions? Okay, Commissioner McSweeney.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I just was curious. I don't remember, even though I sat on the PFRC for this, I don't actually remember the square footage of the Fire Station 8. And I'm just curious. There was a lot of work done, I think, on making that fire station a really modern fire station. There was a lot of change over that process. And I'm just wondering, I would assume that you've taken a lot of that information and that's informing Fire Station 4 and the redesign of that. But what is the comparison in terms of programmatic elements? You know, how and how many fire trucks do we actually have coming in and out as compared to Fire Station 8? And what's the square footage comparison? Do you know that?
Just pass it off to either Ms. Locker or Mr. May and we can also have the fire chief here. So whoever wants to take those questions.
So I can start. This is June. So for Fire Station 8, we ended up at about 21,000 square feet for the total square footage. And in comparison to Fire Station 4, Michelle Congdon, can you just tell us what the final program number is for that? Hold on one second. We can do that.
I thought I saw 18,000, but
that was on the ground floor.
So the total for the fire station is closer to 27. And it has to do a lot with circulation and extra gear storage with the additional staff.
Good evening. This is Dave Palverson, Fire Department. For Station 8, there's planning to be a 1 engine company, 1 medic unit, and possibly 1 or 2 specialty units. For Station 4, which was one of our core stations in the busiest area we have in the county between Roslyn and Ballston, we have a fire engine, a ladder tower truck, a full 24-hour shift medic unit, a partially staffed medic unit during peak times, and also a command support unit. And we have a need to put maybe 1 or 2 other specialty staff or SUV units there. So that's kind of driving the increase in square footage and also programming space. Thus, the current Station 4 is such a core location in the county. We're able to easily respond east, west, south, and we can navigate our way to the north.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Any other clarifying questions that folks have before we jump into the first question? Okay, we can certainly come back if folks have them. So let's go to the first discussion question. So as Brett mentioned, 73% of respondents to the survey either agreed or somewhat agreed with rebuilding the fire station at its current site, with another 24% of respondents neutral or not sure. For those who are not sure or do not agree, I think staff would be interested in your feedback. Brett, would you mind pulling up that slide of some that show the respondents? And then I guess I'll take my own prerogative here. So some folks said that they somewhat agreed with that approach. So I would also welcome if you somewhat agree with this, but don't fully agree with that, we would, I think, welcome your feedback, concerns as well. So again, please raise your virtual hand or turn on your camera if you don't have a virtual hand to raise. Commissioner Sockwell.
Thanks, James. I am just sort of a skeptic on the issue. So a couple of questions. Question one, are we pretty much locked into the site by the proximity, the travel time? That is this kind of an analysis that answers itself once we set forth the travel time and identify that movement to any other site, east or west, is going to be a no-go because it opens up gaps. And question two, in terms of the funding, I don't really know how to deal with that because this is a long-range plan, and just because we don't have current funding, I don't think really is necessarily a deal breaker. In terms of land acquisition, if we assume that this is going to be a mixed public-private development, doesn't that also alter the land acquisition costs? Wouldn't it be possible, if we make that assumption, to acquire land that might be suitable at a more economic cost? Thanks, guys.
Mr. Sockwell, I can answer the first question. Our primary consideration is providing emergency services, and right now the current location for Station 4 is kind of optimal. So in between Wilson, Clarendon, 10th Street, and Hudson Street, that block configuration with access to those arterial roads is another additional benefit. Movement in any direction between 3 or 4 block span to the east or west does start to shift that response time, and we wanted to try to limit that to an additional 60 seconds. So from the time a 911 call comes in and the emergency communication center has to process it, that's about 30 to 60 minutes. Then if we're in the station, the alarm goes off indicating we have to respond. That takes about another 60 minutes to travel to the apparatus and get the appropriate equipment on. Then from what you're seeing on the maps and the modeling, that's the travel time. So we're already stacking on about 2 minutes from from initial 911 call. Because it's such a dense area, it would be a slightly different scenario if it was single family dwellings. Where we pull into the front of the address, it's just a few steps to where we can possibly meet the patient or handle the incident. So in the density, the tall urban environment, by the time we make the first door and either sometimes have to extend numerous flights of steps or make an elevator to get it to a sick patient, that's just additional time. So any movement, while it might not seem much, 60 seconds one way, 60 seconds to the other, it does really impact by the time from the 911 call when there's an indication of there's an emergency to when we actually meet the patient or arrive on the situation. We want to minimize that in any phase of the response as we possibly can. We've also found from 2019, the units from Station 4 respond west towards Ballston approximately 1,200 times a year, and they're traveling to the east towards Roslyn approximately close to 1,600 times a year. So there's about a 400 call difference. We predominantly respond to the east. So again, trying to put it in the middle, while it doesn't seem like a lot, any slight adjustment could definitely impact response to those two dense areas.
Thank you. And then if staff can address the second part of Commissioner Sockwell's question.
Yeah, this is Brett. I can jump in. I think as we had gone over previously on the land acquisition, while there certainly may be some sites nearby that could support the fire station, we don't own those sites, and so and again, with the uncertainty with the funding, the current economic climate, we have decided to focus on the county-owned property on 10th Street. So we haven't, even started to look at any other specific other sites, and done any kind of cost analysis for other sites. So I hope that answers your question.
Commissioner Stockwell, does that answer your questions?
Well, it does. I'm a little bit concerned that the staff hasn't actually looked at other alternative sites in the RB corridor. I am mindful that this was supposed to be a park, and it seems to me that the area is not served by much green space for the perimeter that Brett put forth on the presentation, the circle around the site. So, if we made the decision that this is the only site that'll work because the response time is such that if we move it, we're endangering some lives, then okay. But if there are alternative sites on an axis, just because the county doesn't own it and it would be more expensive to acquire them, it seems to me there maybe should need to be further analysis.
Thank you, Commissioner Stockwell. I appreciate you elucidating your concerns about these other issues. And as Mr. Wallace noted in his presentation, this is not the end of this discussion. So I do appreciate you raising those. Commissioner Lantelmi.
Thank you, Commissioner Troll. I have partly a clarifying question. I know that we have a plan for a park on this site, and which would also extend into the Verizon site. What is the actual possibility or not possibility of Verizon shrinking its footprint there? The Verizon building that's on where the park would be is the big building, the tall one. It's a very, very strongly built building. It would cost a lot of money just to tear that down, even if it was practical to do so. I don't know whether Verizon has any possible interest in rebuilding it or moving it in anywhere near in the next few decades, for example. Does anybody actually talk to Verizon or know what the technical reasons are about the need for this building or the cost of redoing it? Because if Verizon isn't going to move, can't move, that really does severely impinge on the ability to put that park there as envisioned. And if so, then maybe we really should be looking somewhere else for the park and continue to use this for the fire station. That would be my question. What about Verizon?
Mr. Wallace?
Yeah, thanks for the comment. And from what we understand from the Wells Fargo and Verizon team is that the Verizon building, the switching station, is pretty complex. It contains a lot of critical infrastructure for Verizon. And again, from what we've understand and stated in some of the previous conversations, we don't expect the building to go anywhere anytime in the near future. And I can't speak to whether or not it could be rebuilt or reconfigured to house the same infrastructure. That I think that might be more of a discussion topic for our next engagement session in when we post in December, when we start to look at each of the individual sites in more detail. But the point is noted. I think a lot of people are questioning, what's going on inside that building, and I believe the Verizon, the Wells Fargo team has even offered some tours of the building so people get an understanding of what's inside there. But again, if there's further questions about that building, I would defer to the development team on that.
And I do have one follow-up question. For the Verizon building, the tall one, the fourth one, is that on our list of historic buildings? Because it does fit in with the Clarendon ghetto look. It is dated it is dated from that era. So I'm wondering whether it has any historical interest or preservation, whether it's on our inventory.
Yeah, so the Verizon the site is listed on the HRI as important, and that the HRI was again adopted by the county board after the 2006 sector plan, and that's something we can discuss at a later date when we start talking about the individual site plan projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tell-Me. Commissioner Radich, sorry.
Thank you. I was wondering if the county, I believe that the county acquired Fairfax Drive from the Commonwealth several years ago, and I'm thinking my idea for maybe a potential alternative for the fire station would be siting it somewhere on that triangle park and at the end of Fairfax Drive where it meets Kirkwood, as that yeah, I know a park is envisioned there, but there would still be room for some park there. But it really, the opportunity would be it frees up that 10th Street site and it keeps the arterials hopefully right where Chief Pavlik would want them. I don't know if there was any thought given to that. I know the Metro Tunnel adds sort of a wrinkle to that, but perhaps a single-story building wouldn't be as complicated as far as that goes. Thanks.
Yeah, we did. This is Dave Paulson, Fire Department again, and this also goes to Commissioner Stockwell's question earlier. We did look at several possible sites, I'm going to say within a 2 or 3 by 4 block area surrounding the current station. And we had a variety of criteria. Several things was, well, number one, will it fit? Is there access to the arterials? Is it possible for us to have drive-through bays? We do not like to back in, a constant back in where we have pedestrian traffic, numerous apparatus in and out and backing into the station. That's kind of a more of a risky maneuver as we do it anywhere between 10, 20 times a day. We did look at a lot of these facilities and sites, and based on it was very difficult to fit the program requirements on the site, and also the ingress and egress and the ability to drive through. We weren't able to, we just didn't have a lot of options which were around that. Again, what's presented right now in the presentation in that, say, 4 to 5 square block area.
Commissioner, do you have any follow-up questions or comments?
No, that's all. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks. I saw some other hands that I think have gone down. Okay. If people have additional questions, we can certainly come back to this topic. But I would like to, for the moment, move on to the second question here. Regarding what folks might like to see co-located here if a developer, if a partner were identified here. So would you like to see residential, like to see office, kind of what other uses do you think would be the most appropriate? Commissioner Lynn, tell me.
I'd like to see housing here. We have a desperate need for it. It's walking distance to the metro, walking distance to supermarket. It's a great place for housing, and ideally affordable housing. I think they find the way to finance it. That would be my preference. If we can't get that, then certainly something else. The county may also have other types of uses, office uses. Maybe APS might be interested. But housing would be the first thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tell-Me. Before I move on, it is a little tough to hear you. So prior to making further remarks, asked you to address that. Commissioner Morton.
Hi, I'm not sure I heard Commissioner Len tell me exactly either. I think he was talking about housing and specifically affordable housing, and that I would echo those comments given the public nature of the site, the proximity to Metro, et cetera. So that would be my strong recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Morton. And what I heard Commissioner Lentelme mention was housing and affordable housing due to its proximity to Metro. Mr. Nichols.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say also that housing seems like a great use for the area above the site. I know that looking forward, some of the comments from the Civic Association Clarendon Courthouse has been about maintaining office designations in the places where it was made in the past, but here there is no designation, so it seems like housing would be a natural fit. I also had a question on the apron here. It was noted that it needed to be open to the sky, but it looks like that would constrain square footage, buildable square footage, pretty significantly. So I was wondering if that could be explained, why that needs to be open to the sky. It just looked like the plan looks like a lot of asphalt.
Good afternoon again. I would like to make a comment, I guess, in relation to the question. We would be happy to be neighbors with any either mixed or single occupancy. We are, as fire stations in better times, are certainly a hub in the community, and we love to have visitors in, and we hope we can get to that point relatively soon and relatively safety. We're agnostic with whatever type of occupancy we either co-locate with. And again, we're very excited with the new Station 10 in Roslyn, with the housing complex in the neighborhood, amenities around it. And we would love to do a similar project in the future. To address the apron length, we in the mornings and also throughout the shift, we have to do apparatus checks, and with the ladder truck, the ladder tower there, we have to pull it out of the building to test the ladder, to raise it, to extend it, to do some operational checks, training, and also maintenance. So that can happen several times a shift. That's why we need a fair amount of space to either pull out front or pull in the back.
Thanks.
Before I move on, so for those ladder extensions that you're doing, are you extending it the full way? Or are you just doing it partially?
It could be both. It could be all the way or partial. It kind of depends on the needs and what needs to be checked. Yes.
Okay. All right. Commissioner McSweeney, and then Commissioner Morton, I think you still have your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that about Commissioner Lentelme, because I really didn't hear any of his comment, but it sounds like he said affordable housing. I did want to echo that as well. Again, because of where it's located near Metro, there isn't a lot of affordable housing in the area. I mean, there are some, several blocks away, but in general, this is a pretty dense area, and I don't think there's a lot of affordability here. I would say, trying to mix generations, I think would be great too. One of the things I know we've heard about over the last couple of years quite a bit is the lack of affordable housing for people who are retired or elderly. And having that, in a place like Clarendon would be, I think, really great, because then the elderly maybe, won't be driving, but they could be walking to amenities, restaurants, Trader Joe's, that sort of thing.
Hey, Commissioner Schroll, I could say another thing I added to Commissioner Lentelme, if I wasn't heard, was other uses could be the county or APS might have some sort of interest for one of its programs at that site. That should be something that could be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lentelme. Appreciate you adding that additional piece, and I think that's something we did not hear previously, so I'm glad you clarified that as well. Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it's a refrain we're continuing to hear, but I do think that affordable housing is a very appropriate use for that space at that location. I too am very glad that Commissioner Lantelmi was able to improve the connection so he could address the part of the statement that I had not heard, which was with regards to other county uses or potentially for APS. If there were space, I think that, you know, county controlled kind of community space is another idea. Certainly it's very well located and, you know, with the metro, they're very easily accessible. So I think that that could also be a valuable use. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. So we're hearing a general consensus that this be a place for housing and perhaps affordable housing or housing for, as Commissioner McSweeney mentioned, a variety of demographics. So that's what I'm hearing, and also an opportunity perhaps for co-locating either county facilities or APS facilities as well. I'm hearing a lot of that from folks. So if you agree with that, I don't need to hear from you. But if you disagree and think, you know, office would be better here, or this, I would like to hear from folks. You don't have to take a contrarian view from your LRPC colleagues, but if you did feel strongly in a different direction, I would like to hear from folks if that is the case. Mr. Craig.
Yes, given where commercial real estate, to my understanding, is going, and the fact that people are working from home at this time, I think it's quite likely that will continue. I think senior housing might be a good use for this, or affordable housing, either one.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nichols.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that the development could reflect the development done at Fire Station 10, it doesn't really make sense to me why the housing would be income restricted. Like, to my mind, part of the goal of that redevelopment was to have the development of market rate housing enable the redevelopment of the fire station. So it feels like there's some cost pressure there, and that market rate housing might be more appropriate than income restricted housing.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Mr. Craig. Mr. Phillips, you seem to be seeking recognition. Are you or Mr. Spilsbury, which one of you is representing your organization?
Yeah, hello, I'm David Phillips. Jack Spilsbury and I are co-chairs of our development committee, the Ashton Heights Civic Association.
Before you start, Mr. Phillips, so I see you're kind of both here this evening. I'm happy to recognize you to speak, but then I won't acknowledge Mr. Spilsbury. So only one of you will get to speak this evening, and the other can certainly speak during public comment. So with that caveat, again, happy to recognize you, but then, you know, I will not recognize Mr. Spilsbury for the remainder of the LRPC portion, and could certainly, you know, acknowledge him if he has comments to make at the end. So.
Jack, are you there?
Oh, that's fine with me. Yes, please
Is it?
proceed.
Okay, okay then. Now, I just had a question regarding the fire station. We're talking about housing, we're talking about residential accommodation, but I'm really not very sure about how that is consistent with the kind of noise that is coming out of the fire station, particularly sirens. I guess that the 10th Street apartments opposite already have to deal with that. But they're a little bit further away. And I was wondering why we're talking about residential accommodation and rather than, for example, office accommodation, given that problem, especially at night. And I was also wondering, with the rebuilt fire station, is the intention to accommodate additional fire engines, additional vehicles? And if so, how many and what difference would that make to the traffic flow in 10th Street?
Again, good evening. As far as the noise issues, I do have experience with the Potomac Yards Station 209 in Alexandria, which is built on the first story of, I believe, 8 stories of affordable housing above it. And I can say there was actually a fair amount of harmony between the tenants above and also below. There didn't seem to be many issues related to noise. We are building Station 10 in Roslyn with somewhere between 18 and 20 stories of market rate housing. And yes, you're right. The sirens, when we respond, the sirens are just going to bounce off all the vertical structures. So everyone surrounding the area is going to be exposed to the siren noise. Again, over the last 2 years, I've received 2 siren complaints or noise complaints, and they happen to be in the vicinity of Virginia Hospital Center. So I can't say I've had any noise complaints for at least in the last 2 years from Clarendon. As far as units returning and responding from the station, we're probably going to keep the same outlay, which is an engine company, ladder company. We do have 2 medic units there, and then we'll have 1 or 2 SUVs. We're hoping we're going to rebuild a 50 to 75 year station, and we always want to have a little space for expandability, but that's going to be driven and dictated by how the community grows or expands. So we're in the process of a 3-year accreditation process, and we're studying what we think we need to deploy for the next, say, 2 to 5 years. And I can't say at first glance we see a market change in the units that we'll be responding at a station for.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Does that answer your questions?
Well, it is an answer, but I don't know enough about this really. I haven't really studied the situation, so I'm just speaking from a kind of an immediate reaction to this. But let's leave it for now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Phillips. Appreciate your questions. Okay, we got a lot of good pieces of feedback on our second question this evening. I'd like to move on to the third question on the slide about the linear park at Fairfax Drive. So as Mr. Wallace noted, there was a lot of partial support for this. 56% of the respondents indicated that they partially supported this approach, with most of the people indicating that they had some concerns about traffic access, which is and vehicular access, which is the next question. So based on that, would like to get people's reactions in part to this approach, and also what if they do find themselves in this partially support bucket, why are they maybe a little reticent? What concerns do they have? Commissioner Lentelmi.
Sure. Can you hear me better this time, Commissioner Scholl?
I can. Thank you.
Great. this is something I've lived in this area for quite a long time, and I'm familiar with this stretch of Fairfax Drive. As a practical matter, it's really just a large parking lot, and it does a very good job of supporting St. Charles Church and North Side Social, but it's not a through street. To the extent that traffic can use it, can only go one way. You can only go from Wilson Boulevard to Fairfax Drive. You can't go from Fairfax to Wilson. So it really is just a large parking lot. It's way wider than it needs to be for traffic. It strikes me that what's being proposed would be a really great use for this area by turning it over mainly to pedestrians. It doesn't mean that cars have to be totally banned from it, and it doesn't mean that parking has to be totally banned from it at all times. It could be, while the area redevelops, parking could still be allowed on parts of it. You can see that same concept at the wharf. The wharf that they have along there does in fact allow parking. It isn't always parked. It gets closed off at times, and that could happen here too. When it's being used for a festival, let's say, or some other use like that, it could be then be blocked off from cars. But while the church is in session, it could be allowed to be parked almost the way it is now. So I think it could be a very, very flexible space while the area around it is being developed. But it certainly could look totally different than it is now. Could be a lot greener. And I'd be very, very excited to have that trans done with it. And by doing so, it would not, I think, in the least change traffic patterns in this area whatsoever. And as it redevelops, the amount of parking necessary on it would probably be shrinking because parking would probably be on site for the buildings that go up to the extent that it's needed. So, I did a lot of thinking about this, and I was wondering about the parking, I was wondering about the traffic, but looking at it, walking through it, seeing how the uses go over the week, I think that this is a really exciting idea that could be done both in phases and done very flexibly. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Latelmi, for those remarks. Mr. Bader.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Great, wonderful. So I'd like to offer St. Charles's impressions on the responses to question 3. Based on our engagement with parishioners, and I can certainly speak on behalf of the St. Charles Redevelopment Committee, there was what I'll call caveated enthusiasm for the conversion of Fairfax Drive into some sort of green space. But I'd say that the concern would be the complete elimination of the vehicular access. And I think that came up in the survey's responses as well, specifically on the west end of the site. So based on our conceptual planning for future redevelopment, we envisioned the church on the east side of the site facing Clarendon Square and a development parcel on the west end. That development parcel would need some sort of limited vehicular access to support pickup and drop off in front of the envisioned building entrance. The complete elimination of vehicular access would naturally complicate that plan and produce a serious challenge to the site as part of any redevelopment. I'd also add that the feedback that we submitted didn't envision a potential mid-block linkage. So based on my conversations with the St. Charles Redevelopment Committee, our architects, and our attorneys, we would have grave concerns with the conceptual cut-through that was introduced in these county materials. Our redevelopment committee would not support the conversion of Fairfax Drive if it meant mandating a linkage of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bader, for providing that feedback. Commissioner McSweeney, encourage folks to lower their virtual hands once they've concluded. If they have additional remarks, certainly keep them up.
Thank you. If memory serves, there are 2 car-centric businesses that are near Northside Social. There's C&G, and I can't remember the other one. Ah, there it is. Kirby Garage, is that what that says? And so my question is about the entrances to those. Are the entrances to those purely from the Fairfax Drive side, or is there actually an entrance to those on the other block?
Yeah, this is Brett. I can respond to that. So the entrance for the CNG imports is off of Fairfax Drive. There's not an entrance from Wilson Boulevard. And then for the Kirby Garage, the space that I'm showing here with my cursor, this is all at grade. So there is access to Kirby Garage from Wilson Boulevard and also Fairfax Drive over here.
Okay, thank you. And so I frequent that area quite a bit, and you know, I would say there are a lot of cars on the Fairfax parked. In fact, maybe even the last picture you showed that there are a lot of cars that I think belong. And so there would have to be some sort of either you know, if it's their property that they're parking on, obviously they'd need some sort of access to it. But in general, notwithstanding the comment we just heard from Mr. Bader, I personally love the idea of at least some of that, a strip of that at least being green, a green connector.
Thank you, Commissioner McSweeney. Mr. Finn.
Yeah, thank you. My thought on this is, having read through the comments, it's clear that the lost parking that would come from any redevelopment or change to this space has to be seriously considered. And at this point, I'm just wondering, in terms of getting a park that is really going to be functional, a cross use with vehicles is going to be somewhat problematic. And what real studies are being undertaken or considered at this point about how to recoup 83 parking spaces elsewhere in the Clarendon area? Obviously, you have businesses to support and you have a church next to it. Somewhere along the line, there has to be some consideration of that. And, you know, a park certainly can have some element of parking in it and some use of some vehicular traffic, but it's going to be a little bit complicated if really it doesn't get much change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Finn. Mr. Wallace, would you like to speak to what staff has undertaken thus far?
Yeah, so sure. At this point, we've just put together the opportunities and constraints diagram that you see here, and we're certainly aware of all the constraints, including the metro, some vent structures for the metro, the bike lane, the parking, and we're aware of all the you know, the need to strike the right balance for providing access to the businesses and supporting parking for some of the local businesses and restaurants in Clarendon. So, and that's something that we're going to need to continue to look at. We're not prepared at this point to, I mean, we don't have a design or an answer at this point. We really want to hear from the group here, some of the concerns or some suggestions, but I think what we would do is take this feedback and you know, meet internally as staff to potentially show some concepts at maybe some future engagement sessions when we start to talk about the street designs, some of the new street locations and dimensions. But we certainly hear all the comments and feedback, and but we need to still do some further analysis with our transportation staff and our parks and recreation staff, so that we can, you know, set the expectations here. We don't want to assume that this is just going to be converted to a green park, while we certainly need to maintain maybe some limited vehicular access and certainly some bicycle access as well. So we need to do some further analysis, and we're prepared to do that in future engagements.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. And something for folks to remember is that while staff's proposal for our consideration this evening is beyond what was called for in the sector plan, Fairfax Drive was anticipated to be converted in part to mostly a linear park, right, Mr. Wallace?
Yeah, in fact, if you can see my cursor about right here between the North Side Social and Kirby Garage, from this point towards Clarendon Circle was all envisioned to be West End Plaza, completely closed off to vehicular access. And then everything to the left here towards Kirkwood Road was envisioned to be a multi-use space to support, potential expansion of market type events along Fairfax Drive.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Mr. Nichols.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say that the reason I put partially support on there is due to the compatibility of the bike lanes, making sure that those get maintained. The westbound one especially is currently very useful. It's very easy to get from Wilson to Fairfax on it. The eastbound one is significantly less useful because the Fairfax, Kirkwood, Jackson 10th intersection doesn't really facilitate turning left as a cyclist very well. But the eastbound one is very important for linking Clarendon and Virginia Square. So would want to make sure that is maintained. Oh, sorry, the westbound one.
The westbound, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That is right adjacent to St. Charles Borromeo, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, with regard to the linear park idea, of course, it's a great idea. I'm fully in favor of more parks. And I know the residents of Ashton Heights are also very much in favor of more parks and more green space. If it was possible to design this so that only the east end of that space, closer to Clarendon itself, was used as a park, and the rest was used as a space, and the rest of it to the west end was used for parking, then it might be feasible. But it seems to me that, from my observation, that parking space along that section of Fairfax Drive is almost always full, and we know, of course, that there is a tremendous pressure on parking space in the area. If we are going to have, especially if we're going to have major commercial development in the area, it seems to me that we can't just abandon space for whatever it is, 80 vehicles. So there needs to be some kind of an alternative to that. I don't see that we can just abandon that space. Like I say, we might be able to carefully redesign it to get more cars in, let's say at the west end of that or the western half of that. But and to make a bit of space for a public park to the east end. But getting rid of that parking area completely, as far as I know, would create some real problems given the lack of visitor parking elsewhere in the immediate area.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I appreciate your comments. Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. First, I want to commend staff. I thought that was a very insightful comment that at this point, we really need to kind of see what the design would look like and what the possibilities are before we can determine what, if anything, is going to make sense in terms of a conversion of use from just the parking to having park space, either in part or over the entirety of the space. I think that I'm cautiously optimistic that there is a good way to design the space that would allow for retention of some parking and also to get us some of that linear park space that I think there is support for, at least in some form. But I think that it is a difficult site in terms of meeting the needs of the community and, increasing commercial needs of the community in all likelihood, without kind of seeing some of what that kind of design looks like. But I'm encouraged that we should proceed down that path to see what the possibilities are. And I do want to reiterate, we are very close to the metro here. So I think while I appreciate that the spaces are often in use, I do think that there's an opportunity here to address how parking is used in this location overall, and that it, from my perspective, it does not have to look like this in order to still be useful to the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberger. Mr. Bader.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. I just wanted to follow up on my earlier comment and specifically to something that Commissioner McSweeney mentioned. Allow me to clarify, the church is enthusiastic about the potential conversion of that site into some sort of a green space, just with the appropriate caveats, and our concerns being the vehicular access on the west side and that mid-block linkage. Also, with regards to parking, certainly with the proposed or envisioned redevelopment of that site, we wouldn't need parking on that strip. We've envisioned the parking underground as befits a future redevelopment efforts. And I've heard a number of other commissioners and participants mention that there's a need to look at this site a little bit more closely. And I would certainly agree. We worked with our architects actually to submit a concept plan to the county staff. And we'd be excited to share that, and we look forward to discussing that. And we think we were able to strike the balance there of the need for the green space, limited vehicular access, bike routes, so on and so forth. So we're excited to discuss that when the time is right. I just wanted to follow up and say that we are in fact enthusiastic, just when balanced with these other needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you clarifying the church's position. Commissioner Morton.
Sorry, thank you very much. I would like to echo Commissioner Steinberger and perhaps supporting a limited amount of parking, but it doesn't need to look like this. We generally discourage this so close to the metro for most projects, so I'd love to continue that practice. I do endorse the idea of a linear park, in part, like was stated, it is in the plan as proposed to be green and some sort of festival type activity. Thank you to Mr. Bader. I was going to ask him this. I thought I had understood that the church was planning to accommodate its own parking needs on site. And in fact, maybe even on your website, you talk about perhaps providing fee parking. I know it's premature to talk about your specific proposal, but it kind of seemed like you were anticipating an excess of parking that you could lease out to other people.
Mr. Bader, if you would like to comment on where the church is now with its planning, please feel free to do so. Obviously, if you have not gotten to that stage, you can also.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, sure thing, Commissioner. And thank you, Commissioner Morton. It's good to see that you're reading the materials closely. What those materials said was that was actually some of the feedback that we had received from parishioners. Parishioners were excited at the prospect of possibly offering paid parking on the site. So it's too early for us to be able to speak to having that sort of access parking wise in the future. Naturally, for our purposes, we are planning for that sort of underground parking. But like you said, it's too early for us to say that. And it was just enthusiasm on the part of our parishioners when we conducted an online engagement. But thank you for the question.
Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Radick.
Thank you. I just want to echo Commissioner Steinberger and Lantelmi. One thing that we see coming before the Transportation Commission routinely is site plans that are very much overparked, and existing buildings that are around Clarendon and the RB corridor generally have a ton of extra parking that largely goes unused. So the fact that we might lose 80 spots does not mean that we have a parking issue or with what's being proposed here. And in fact, what St. Charles will build and these other site plans like the Silver Diner site and others will likely come in overparked as well. So it's I don't see parking as an issue, but I just wanted to echo those concerns.
Great, thank you. Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. You know, when we were looking at the overhead, that aerial view, it strikes me that the biggest landowner here is St. Charles Church. And I'm hearing, and I'm sorry I haven't read as much probably as Commissioner Morton has, so I'm not sure what your proposal looks like, potential proposal. But I guess I would encourage us, if there is some sort of an assemblage of buildings that would make sense. And I heard you say, Mr. Bader, that the church might move to the east, I believe, near where that county land green space might be. And I'm just sort of wondering if some juggling maybe of land might help the situation. And I would hope that maybe St. Charles and the county might be open to that if it creates an opportunity somewhere else, maybe, I don't know, closer to Washington Boulevard, or to create maybe a strip of green space as well, or, just kind of think creatively, I guess is what I'm encouraging us to do. So if there is some sort of a land swap and, moving St. Charles maybe more into Fairfax Drive, since it isn't really a through street, could create some different possibilities in this area. I would encourage us to think about it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Bader, I'll give you certainly the opportunity to respond to that if you would like.
Sure thing. Thank you, Commissioner Schrull, and thank you, Commissioner McSweeney. Of course, we're open to conversations with the county. Perhaps it'd be most prudent to save the conversations about our site for maybe a later LRPC. Again, as I'd mentioned, we've submitted some conceptual plans to the county. So Mr. Wallace has seen them, and we look forward to having those conversations. In concept and in theory, we've considered a swap of this nature. I think what complicates the matter is the metro underneath the site, and that produces some very real challenges immediately. But your point is very well taken. We're certainly open to conversations with the county, and we look forward to discussing this in greater detail at a later LRPC.
Thank you, Mr. Bader. Mr. Craig.
Both Northside Social and Kirby Garage, which are historic structures, are going to need some sort of accessibility, transportation accessibility. So you whatever plans we come up with, they're going to need to work with the ability of vehicles to service Northside Social and the Kirby Garage, both.
Certainly a good point. All right. So we've heard a lot of concerns about this space. I want to briefly pivot to see and we've heard some from folks about what they think would make this space useful, attractive. And so we're getting towards the end of our discussion. We have kind of answered some of questions 4 and 5 a little bit. And so if there are folks who had comments that maybe they felt like fit better under questions 4 and 5, they want to raise those now, please do so. What I'm hearing, though, is an openness to consider an expanded linear park, even by some of the adjacent property owners, and certainly a concern, though, about access and about some retention of parking. So that's what I'm hearing. If people did have other things that they wanted to raise, now would be a good time to do so. And as Mr. Wallace noted, we will be hearing more about this in subsequent meetings. So when we discuss next steps, Mr. Wallace, we hopefully kind of can touch on this again, but in upcoming meetings, we're going to talk more about streetscape and about open space. And so there will be further opportunity to provide feedback on these issues. and they will get further refined as well. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? I guess I didn't really summarize some of the earlier points. It did seem like from our previous discussion about the fire station, it did look like from those who shared their comments that there's maybe a little bit of skepticism about what other sites have been considered, about whether or not we are eliminating other sites perhaps too quickly, realizing that we still need to have adequate response times, and that's a real issue, and that stations ideally would be designed in a certain manner as well. And then also some concern about the loss of the 50,000 square feet of open space that was called out for in the sector plan, and certainly some indication from LRPC members that they, if we are to lose that 50,000 square feet called out for in the sector plan for that 10th Street Park, that there would be an effort to find that and identify another location for that through this process. Okay. I'm going to pass it off to Mr. Wallace now to kind of talk through next steps, if he could do that, and then we will open it up to public comment. I do see that we have at least 2 speakers, and I'll see if there's others.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we looked at the schedule earlier, and here we are today, November 19th. This is our first LRPC. Again, we've talked about the fire station and the public space opportunities. We're looking ahead to December, where we would post another recorded staff presentation where we would go over the private development proposals. We'd also be presenting some 3D modeling to show some sector plan deviations from the applicant teams and talk through some of the pros and cons of that. So again, we'll be looking at each of the sites in greater detail. But we'll also be starting our conversation on some of the new street locations that are being proposed and looking at some of the streetscape and cross sections on some of the dimensions and design. And I think we'll certainly talk more about Fairfax Drive. We have a lot of folks in our transportation staff that are very in tune to this concept, and so we'll want to explore that a little bit further in that engagement. And then looking into the January, February time frame, looking to post yet presentation where we'll start to look at building height and form. And again, we would come back and revisit some of the public parks and open space based on some further analysis. And then we would follow up in the first quarter of next year with another virtual LRPC meeting where we would, again, look at those agenda topics from the online engagement sessions 2 and 3. And then, of course, looking into the spring, summer of next year, looking closer at the land use mix, some further transportation analysis, and then, looking even further into the second quarter, start looking at some of the draft tools, revised planning guidance, some policies, maps for not only the sector plan, but also the zoning ordinance, and maybe some revised 3D modeling scenarios. And again, looking to conclude the process in the third quarter next year with the county board actions and commission reviews. So I think we have a lot of work to do. We certainly appreciate all the feedback this evening, and again, we plan to post some materials in a few weeks before the end of the year. And of course, you can always stay informed with looking at the project website with the link here, or contacting myself. Happy to hear additional feedback offline. So yeah, really appreciate everybody's time this evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace, for walking through the next steps and for your presentation this evening. I do want to thank all our staff members who have joined us as well. Before I forget and before I go to public comment, two remarks that I want to make. This is going to be, as Mr. Wallace noted, a multi-month process. And so it might be a good idea for commissions or organizations to identify alternates. So Ashton Heights did that, and they had 2 people here this evening. So kudos to them for that. If there are other organizations that have, I would encourage other organizations to perhaps do that, given that you might not be able to be in attendance. With that being said, only 1 person per organization will be able to participate in the meeting itself, but we would certainly welcome public comment by other individuals who are in attendance. Second point is, for future meetings, I would encourage folks to just put their organization in parentheses after their name, given how many people we have on this Microsoft Teams call. That will help me certainly manage this meeting. The last thing I guess I will say is Commissioner Sarli is also helping me lead this process. So while he wasn't leading the conversation this evening, he's also helping manage this process as well. So with that, I'd like to go to public comment. Commissioner Giacomini, and then we will have Dr. Byrne. So former Commissioner Giacomini.
Hi, good evening. I want to thank James, Commissioner Schroll, for running a really efficient LRPC meeting. I know it's been very challenging as we do this over in a virtual environment. And I thank Brett Wallace and the whole county staff team. This is a great undertaking. I was part of the Clarendon sector plan update in the early 2000s. And, you know, it's a big deal, but it's good that we're revisiting it. I just want to take a moment and talk a little bit about the notion of Fairfax Drive becoming a linear park. I think while we thought about it as being a space for markets and different functions, we back in the early 2000s wanted to have some parking available. I know that sounds a little bit like a troglodyte, you know, we're supposed to, you know, not be dealing with a lot of parking, but frankly, with 2 historic structures there, Northside Social, which is a local historic district, and the Kirby Garage, they need to remain viable for business. And frankly, having parking available to them, even as sort of, if you will, teaser parking, you know, that might not fit all their needs, but that gives people some thought that perhaps they could park there, is really necessary for the continued use of those buildings. It could be that we require some parking at the Silver Diner site that might be able to help them. That would be a good trade-off perhaps. But I think we really need to think creatively about park space in Fairfax Drive. And that could be something where the park is slightly elevated and we have some parking and retail at the ground level. I'm not sure, but if we don't think big about this, I think we're doing us all a disservice, and we're really not helping the historic structures that help give a real nature and sense of place to Clarendon. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Giacomini. Always good to have former planning commissioners continue to join us on these meetings. So thank you. Dr. Byrne.
Yes. Yes, I have some comments about the park on Fairfax Drive. First of all, I think it's an excellent idea to have a park, a green park. Basically, the whole Roswell Wilson corridor, especially Clarendon, really has very little way of pollinated areas and things like that. What parks there are mostly mowed grass. They converted part of the area right next to the metro station from basically a grassy area there into a plaza. Which is, that plaza is used for a marketplace and anything else you're thinking of putting there. You simply don't need any more in Clarendon. You have a space existing that was not in existence when you made the Clarendon sector plan. It came in later. But you probably know it, right next to the metro station, a large paved area, which replaced a grassy area. Okay, so we need to compensate for this. So we need to take some of those grassy areas and convert them into pollinated areas and make new ones. Basically, we do have a pollinator pledge. It's in the Public Space Master Plan. There's a monarch pledge the county board do it. We have to create these in the metro corridors. Otherwise, you can lose your birds and your butterflies and everything else, which you've lost a lot of. Now, specifically, underground parking. You've got to look and see if there's enough space, because of the metro. If there's enough space, put one level of underground parking beneath there. That's a necessary thing before you go any further. Is there enough space considering the metro structures? Metro tends to be deep. They do have access to things through vents and things, but there probably is space to put above the metro a level of underground parking. Second of all, surface parking in a metro area. There's none other in the metro, in the whole entire metro corridor they know about except for this. I mean, it's simply incompatible with metro and public transportation. And we've been talking about this for years. Anyone who's saying there should be surface parking there is just not doing what is doing everywhere else in the county. So there should be no surface parking there. That's a waste, except for maybe one right in front of the church for people coming in and out. Now again, Kirby Garage. That doesn't need parking. That's a garage. I mean, people drive their cars into it. There's no reason to worry about parking for Kirby Garage. Northside Social, okay, there is a small need, but not much. Again, they're coming from Metro. You don't encourage it. And similarly, when you put these new projects in, like Silver Diner or the church, you could put paid parking or something like that, even free parking inside that garage, but just a small amount, so you'll count extra for Northside Social. But that's the only business that needs it. Access to Northside Social is also from Wilson Boulevard, as there's access to Wilson Boulevard for Kirby Garage. There's simply no reason to have access to those from there. Right now, Kirby Garage is actually, for years, it has been intruding on the county space by putting a dumpster on the sidewalk, so people have to walk in the street. That shows you what kind of a business Kirby Garage is. I complained about this years ago and nothing ever happened. So basically, Kirby Garage is only using that space for it's sidewalk for its dumpster. Okay, next. You need the plaza. Again, you have a plaza on the west side of the east side of the site that's planned. Because you do now have that new plaza near Metro, you should consider the whole green space as extending into that west side plaza, the east side plaza. That's right near the corner of Washington Boulevard. Right now, again, it's kind of a grassy area, some trees, no pollinated areas. Never ever thought of it. No natural area. But this project, the whole area, Fairfax Drive and of green space, should be extended eastward into that plaza, because the paved plaza is simply not necessary there, because you have that one right near the metro station. So think seriously about extending this project toward that eastern plaza at the corner, because really that should be green space and things like that. So think a little bit more in terms of expanding the green space. Thinking the real absence of a need for parking there at all. And if necessary, look closely. It was suggested earlier that you could look at the underground parking there, and there's a question about metro constraints. Well, look into that carefully and see, is metro deep enough that you could still have that, and you still have space for the vents, of course, directly underneath the plaza. But these are important points to look at.
Thank you, Dr. Byrne. I appreciate you raising all those points with us this evening. All right. Check to see if we had any other public comment. I don't see any. Again, if you are joining us this evening and would like to make a public comment, please just type it into the chat feature to the right. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anybody type anything in. If you are joining us, like Mr. Wallace said, you can certainly reach out to him, or you can reach out to me. My contact information is on the Planning Commission website. Thank you again to all the folks that joined us for the LRPC. It is a large group, so please bear with us. This will be, again, a multi-month process. Again, encourage folks to identify additional people to take part if you can. Again, we will only seat one of you from your organization, but it's always good to have an alternate if possible. So thanks again, and I certainly appreciate the number of staff members that took the time to be with us this evening. I know we had folks from Parks and Rec. We had some people from our facilities team. Thank you to the chief for being with us, and there are folks from our planning division for this. So thanks again. Stay safe. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and we will see you all soon.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Commissioner Schroll.